Welcome to Sleepy Beep. Settle in wherever you are. You don't have to follow this closely. You don't have to remember any of it. There's nothing here to figure out and nowhere else you need to be tonight. So let the weight of the day start to leave your shoulders and let your breathing slow down to match the slow, easy pace of these words. Take a deep breath in all the way down and let it go. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with something almost everyone has felt and almost nobody understands. That strange, quiet ache of trying very hard to be liked, to be respected, to be wanted, and watching it slip further away the harder you reach for it. You may have lived this. Most of us have. You wanted someone to like you, so you texted a little more, smiled a little wider, agreed a little quicker, made yourself a little more available. And instead of pulling them closer, it seemed to push them off, gently, like a magnet turned the wrong way. And the more it happened, the more confused you became because you were doing everything right. You were being kind, you were being attentive, you were trying. There's an answer to this, a real one. Not the tired one you've heard 100 times, not just be more confident, which is a little like telling a person who can't sleep to just relax. Tonight is about the why underneath it, the actual mechanism. And it turns out the mechanism is far stranger and far kinder to you than the version you've probably been carrying. So let's slow all the way down and walk into it together, in the dark, with nothing to prove and no one to impress. Let me start with something a psychologist named Robert Zionk discovered back in 1968. His name is spelled in a way that looks impossible and is pronounced more or less like science with a Z. He studied something he called the mere exposure effect, and the basic idea is one of the most comforting things in all of psychology. It says that the more we're simply exposed to something, a face, a song, a word, a shape, the more we tend to like it. Just seeing something again and again with no other reason warms us to it. A song you didn't care for on the first listen becomes a favorite by the 10th. A face in the crowd you pass every morning starts to feel friendly, familiar, safe. Repetition, all on its own, breeds affection. You've felt this. The coffee shop you go back to, the old sweater, the road home. And if the story ended there, it would be wonderful news for anyone trying hard to be loved. It would mean the more you show up, the more you reach out, the more contact you make, the more they'll like you. Just keep appearing, keep trying, wear them down with your presence until familiarity blooms into fondness. But here is the part of Zajonk's work that almost nobody mentions, and it's the part that matters most for us tonight. The mere exposure effect only runs one direction, when the starting point is neutral or warm. When the first response to something is pleasant or simply blank, more exposure makes it more liked. But when the first response is negative, when there's already a flicker of something aversive, something that grates, then repetition does the opposite. More exposure deepens the dislike. The same machine that turns a stranger into a friend can turn a mild irritation into a real aversion just by repeating it. The repetition isn't neutral, it amplifies whatever's already there. If the seed is warmth, it grows warmth. If the seed is discomfort, it grows discomfort. Let that settle for a moment because it explains something that has quietly broken a great many hearts. Imagine a line. On one side of the line, every bit of effort you make, every message you send, every moment you spend with someone makes them like you a little more. You're in the warm zone. Showing up works, but somewhere along the way, without any announcement, without any sign, you can cross that line. And once you're on the other side of it, once the signal you're sending has tipped from pleasant to faintly aversive, every single thing that used to draw them closer now pushes them away. The texts that warmed them now weary them. The attention that flattered them now smothers them. And here's the cruel part. the part that turns a sad situation into a spiral. You can't see the line. There's no marker on it. No one tells you you've crossed. And so what do you do when you notice them pulling back? You try harder. You reach more. You text again. You explain. You apologize. You show up. Which on the wrong side of that line is precisely the thing accelerating the loss. Every extra try digs the hole a little deeper. You're rowing as hard as you can, and the boat is going backward, and you respond to going backward by rowing harder still. That's the doom spiral. And almost everyone who has ever cared too much about someone has lived inside it at least once, rowing in the dark, exhausted, certain that if they could just try a little harder, it would finally turn around, not knowing that trying harder is the engine of the very thing they fear. So let's pause right here, just for a breath before we go on, because I want to say something gently before we go any deeper. If you've lived inside that spiral, and you may be lying there tonight with someone's name still echoing, I want you to know it wasn't because something is broken in you. It wasn't because you weren't good enough or interesting enough or worthy of being kept. The spiral isn't a verdict on your value. It's a mechanism, a trick of how the human mind reads signals in the dark. And by the end of our time together tonight, I think you'll be able to set a little of that weight down. So take a slow, deep breath. Let your jaw unclench. Let your tongue rest soft in your mouth, and let's keep going slowly. Now, before we walk down into the mechanism, I want to make you a small promise, a thread I'll leave hanging that we'll come back to later, much later, when you may already be half asleep, and that's fine. The promise is this: there is exactly one signal in all of human social life that actually draws respect and warmth toward you reliably. And it is the one signal you cannot fake. People try to fake it constantly. They learn the tricks, they perform the postures, they rehearse the cool indifference. And it leaks, it always leaks. Tonight we'll get to why it leaks and why the only version of it that works is the real one, and where the real one actually comes from. Hold that lightly, we'll come back to it. For now, just know there's a thread and we'll follow it home. Here's the reframe I want to give you, the one that changes everything that comes after. We tend to think that when we lose someone's respect, it's because we lacked something. Confidence, charm, some shining quality we couldn't muster. We think of it as a deficiency, a hole in us they noticed. But that's not quite what's happening. The respect isn't being lost because of something missing in you. It's being lost because of something you're transmitting. It's not a deficiency, it's a leak. You're broadcasting information constantly below the level of words, and the information you broadcast when you try too hard is a very specific signal that the human social mind reads instantly and unconsciously as low value. You're not failing to send a good signal, you're successfully sending a bad one. And the strange mercy in that is, a leak can be sealed. A deficiency feels permanent, like a missing limb. A leak is just a behavior, a signal, a thing you're doing without knowing it. And things you do without knowing it can be brought into the light and changed. So what is the signal exactly? What is it that visible effort transmits? This is the heart of tonight, the thing the whole evening turns on. So let me say it slowly. When you want something visibly, when your wanting shows, when your reaching is plain to see, you are broadcasting a single piece of information about yourself, whether you mean to or not. You're broadcasting that you don't already have it. Think about that for a moment in the quiet. We don't visibly chase the things we already possess. A person who has plenty of water doesn't lunge for the glass. A person who is genuinely full doesn't eye the last roll on the table. We reach for what we lack. We chase what we don't have. And so when someone sees you reaching, really reaching openly, hungrily, the message their mind receives beneath all your charm and all your kindness is simple and devastating. This person does not already have what they're reaching for. They lack it, and the lack itself becomes the signal. Now here is the turn, the part that makes it a paradox instead of just a sadness. The human mind takes "this person lacks this" and translates it automatically, almost instantly, into "this person is lower in value." Because in the deep old logic of the social brain, the people who have plenty are the people of high standing, and the people who are scrambling and reaching are the people of lower standing. Reaching is what the hungry do. Composure is what the full can afford. So your very wanting, the visible, naked wanting itself, broadcasts the exact data point that lowers your worth in their eyes. The thing you most want, you make harder to get by wanting it visibly. The chase isn't self-defeating because it's morally wrong or weak or pathetic. It's self-defeating informationally. It transmits the one fact that lowers your price. This is the observability paradox, and it's worth sitting with in the dark. The wanting destroys the getting because the wanting is visible. If you could want without showing it, the wanting would cost you nothing. But the moment it shows, it becomes the very evidence used against you. I know that can sound a little cold, laid out like that. So let me soften it because there's tenderness here too. This isn't a flaw in you, and it isn't even really a flaw in them. The person pulling away from your effort usually has no idea why. If you asked them, they couldn't tell you. They'd shrug and say something vague. It just didn't feel right. The spark wasn't there. I can't explain it. They're not running a calculation on a chalkboard. They're feeling a pull, a recoil that arrives without explanation, decoded somewhere far below the words they have for it. You're not the only one in the dark. They're in it too. The signal is being sent below awareness, and it's being read below awareness. And on both sides, nobody quite knows what just happened between you. That's the loneliest part of it, and also, somehow, the gentlest. Nobody chose this. It just ran the way water runs downhill, the way the old machinery turns, whether we understand it or not. Let's pause again, hear, and breathe. You don't need to hold all of this. If only one piece of it has landed, maybe just the idea that what you felt wasn't weakness, but a signal you didn't know you were sending, then that's enough for now. Let the rest wash over you. Breathe in slowly. Hold it for just a moment at the top, and let it sink back down. Feel the bed beneath you holding all of your weight, asking nothing of you. There is nothing to chase in this room, nothing to reach for. You can let your hands go soft. And when you're ready, we'll go on, slower still. There was a man, long before any of the science we've talked about, who saw this whole pattern clearly and gave it a name. His name was Willard Waller, and he was a sociologist. And in 1938, almost a century ago now, by lamplight and typewriter, long before anyone was texting anyone, he wrote down a law about human relationships so simple and so unforgiving that it has quietly governed people's lives ever since. He called it the principle of least interest. And what it says is this: in any relationship between two people, the one who is less invested holds the power. The one who cares less controls more. Whoever wants it less wins. Sit with how strange and how true that is. It means power in a relationship doesn't flow to the kinder person, or the more devoted one, or the one who loves harder, or the one who gives more. It flows structurally, almost mechanically, to whoever needs the relationship least. The person who could walk away most easily is the person who sets the terms. The one for whom this matters less gets to decide how it goes, and the one for whom it matters most, the one lying awake, the one reaching, the one for whom this single relationship has become load-bearing, that person, by the very depth of their caring, hands over the steering wheel. This is the structural law underneath every smaller thing we'll talk about tonight. All the micro-behaviors, all the little leaks, the over-texting and the over-apologizing and the over-explaining we'll get to, they're all just surface expressions of this one deep current. Whoever cares less holds the power. And when you're the one trying hard, you are, by definition, the one who cares more. You've announced it. You've made it visible. And in announcing it, you've handed the other person the position of least interest, which is the position of power, simply by occupying the position of most interest yourself. Now, I want to be careful here because this could be heard as something cruel, something that says you should care less, that the answer is to make yourself colder, to love less, so you can win more. That's not it. That's the cheap reading. The one 1,000 people have taken and turned into manipulation and game playing, and it doesn't even work. We'll see later, much later, why it doesn't work, why the faked version always leaks through. The principle of least interest isn't an instruction to care less. It's a description of an asymmetry. And asymmetry is the key word. The problem isn't that you care. Caring is beautiful. The problem is when all the caring sits on one side of the scale, when the entire weight of the relationship rests on your shoulders and almost none on theirs. When this one outcome is everything to you and merely something to them. Picture two people at a table and between them a single thing they both could want. For one of them, that thing is the whole world. Their happiness depends on it. Their sense of worth hangs on it. The night will be unbearable without it. For the other, it would be nice, pleasant, fine either way. Now, who decides what happens? Of course, it's the second person, not because they're stronger or wiser or better, only because they want it less. Their walkaway is easy. The first person's walkaway is catastrophe. And that gap and that difference in how much each person stands to lose is the entire power gap, the whole thing. Power in a relationship just is the difference in how much each person needs it to continue. And notice, please notice, because this is where the mercy lives. Notice what this means about the solution. If the power gap comes from the asymmetry of stakes, then it has nothing to do with being more charming or more clever or more beautiful or more anything. None of the things you've been told to improve. The lever isn't out there in how impressive you are. It's in here, in how much this single outcome is allowed to mean. The whole game changes, not when you become more dazzling, but when this one person, this one job, this one outcome stops being the thing your entire night depends on. We'll walk all the way down to that, slowly, in the parts ahead. For now, I just want to plant it like a small seed in soft ground. The asymmetry is the problem, and the asymmetry can be evened, not by caring less, but by needing this one outcome less, because you've quietly come to have more. So let's gather just for a moment what we've met tonight before we go further, because the rest of our journey will build on these few quiet stones, and you can let everything else slip away. We met Robert Zajonc and his mere exposure effect, and the hidden edge of it, that more contact only warms people when the starting feeling is good, and once you've crossed into the aversive, every extra try makes it worse, not better. We met the doom spiral that grows out of that edge, the exhausting backward rowing in the dark. We met the reframe that softens everything, that lost respect is not a deficiency in you, but a signal leaking out of you. And a leak, unlike a deficiency, can be sealed. We met the observability paradox, that visible wanting broadcasts the one fact that lowers your value because we only reach for what we lack, and the lack itself becomes the signal. And we met Willard Waller writing in 1938, naming the principle of least interest, that whoever cares less holds the power, that power is just the asymmetry of stakes, and that the fix is not to care less, but to need less, because no single outcome should be carrying the whole weight of your worth. And I left you one thread, remember? The thread will follow home much later. The one signal you can't fake, the only one that truly works. We've started to see its shape now, haven't we, in the principle of least interest. Because the person who genuinely cares less, who genuinely could walk away, who genuinely already has enough, that person is sending a signal the chaser cannot counterfeit. But how that works, why it can't be faked, and where that genuine fullness actually comes from, that's still ahead of us, waiting, patient, in the parts to come. For now, let it all go a little soft. You don't have to remember the names or the dates. You don't have to do anything with this tonight. Just let yourself be the one person in this whole quiet picture who has nothing to chase, nothing to prove, no one to win. Right here, in this bed, in this dark, you already have everything you need. The reaching can wait. The wanting can rest. Take one more slow breath all the way down and feel how it is to need nothing at all just for a moment, just for now. And when you're ready, we'll go on together, deeper into the quiet. Let us go back gently to the beginning of the spiral because it helps to see how it starts before it ever feels like a spiral at all. There is a man named Robert Zayonk, and in 1968 he showed something the world has half understood ever since. He found that the more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to like it. A face we see often, a song we hear again and again, a word that returns. Familiarity, he found, quietly warms us toward a thing. This is the mere exposure effect, and most people stop the story there because that part is comforting. Just be around them more, the thinking goes. Show up, be seen, let the warmth build. But Zayonk found a second thing, and the second thing is the one nobody repeats, and it is the one that matters most tonight. The warming only happens when the first feeling was neutral, or already a little kind. When the first impression was good enough, more contact deepens the liking. But when the first response was negative, when the presence already carried something aversive, something that grated, then exposure does the opposite. Repetition does not soften it. Repetition amplifies it. More contact makes the dislike grow. Sit with how cruel that is for a moment. There is a line somewhere, invisible, that you cannot see while you are crossing it. On one side of that line, trying a little more, showing up a little more, being a little more present, all of it helps. The warmth builds the way Zayonk first described, but once you have crossed to the other side, once your presence has registered as needy, as pressing, as too much, every additional effort no longer warms. It accelerates the cooling. The harder you try, the faster they pull away. And here is the part that turns it into a spiral, the part that traps so many gentle, well-meaning people in the dark. You cannot feel the line. You only feel the pulling away. And when someone pulls away, what is the most human thing in the world to do? You try harder. You reach more. You show up again, hoping this time it lands. And each reach, past the line, digs the hole a little deeper. This is the doom spiral, and it is worth naming slowly because naming it is half of being free of it. The behavior lowers the respect. The lowered respect raises your anxiety, the small panic of feeling someone slip. The anxiety pushes you toward more of the very behavior that lowered the respect in the first place. And around it goes, lower respect, more fear, more reaching, lower respect again. Not because you are doing anything wrong in your heart. Your heart is fine. Your heart just wants connection, the way every heart does. The spiral is not a flaw in your character. It is a feedback loop in a system you could not see. And I want you to notice something tender here before we go further. The person caught in this loop is not foolish. They are not weak. They are simply trying with everything they have to keep something they are afraid of losing. The trying is love in its anxious form. It has just been pointed in a direction that defeats it. So tonight, if you have ever been that person, reaching, explaining, apologizing, refreshing the screen to see if they answered, I want you to set down any shame about it. There is no shame in having loved something so much you tried too hard to keep it. The only thing we are doing here, slowly, in the dark, is understanding the machine, not blaming the hand caught inside it. Now, let us put the core reframe in plain words, because everything that comes after stands on it, and it is the quiet hinge of this whole long night. When someone respects you less for trying too hard, it is tempting to hear that as a verdict on your confidence, as if there were some glowing thing called confidence that other people can sense, and you simply do not have enough of it, and that lack is why you lost the room. That framing feels true, and it is almost completely useless because it tells you the outcome and hides the lever. It says, be more confident and they will respect you. But that is a circle. It names the destination and calls it directions. Here is the truer thing. Respect is not lost because of some missing aura. It is lost because trying too hard transmits specific, decodable signals, small, observable, concrete things, and the human social brain reads those signals as low value. It happens fast, and it happens below awareness on both sides of the exchange. The person trying hard does not know they are leaking, and the person pulling back does not know why they are recoiling. They just feel a vague discomfort, a quiet wish for distance, and they could not explain it to you if you asked. So the loss of respect is not a confidence deficiency. It is an information leak. You are broadcasting data you do not mean to broadcast, and the other person is receiving it without knowing they have received it. Once you hear it that way, the whole problem changes shape in your hands. A confidence deficiency feels like a flaw in who you are, something deep and fixed and shaming. An information leak feels like something else entirely, like a window left open, like a tell in a card game, something specific, something you can understand and locate and in time stop emitting. We are not going to fix your soul tonight because your soul does not need fixing. We are going to find the open windows. And the first, the largest, the one beneath all the others. Let us name it plainly. Call it the observability paradox. It goes like this. We only reach for what we do not already have. You do not chase the air you are breathing. You do not pursue the ground you are standing on. You reach for the thing that is missing, the thing just out of your hands. And so reaching, visible reaching, is itself a piece of information. It says, without a word, I do not have this yet. And the social brain, ancient and quick and not at all polite, takes that signal, does not have it, and quietly translates it into another. Then it must be worth less to me, too. Read that again slowly because it is the strange engine under the whole thing. The wanting destroys the getting, precisely because the wanting can be seen. If you could want something and the wanting were perfectly invisible, none of this would happen. But wanting is rarely invisible. It leaks out of the eyes, the timing, the tone, the speed of the reply, the unrequested apology, the laugh that comes a half second too early. And every leaked drop of visible wanting carries the same small message. I am reaching, which means I do not have, which means perhaps this is not freely mine. And the value quietly falls. This is not a moral failing. There is nothing dirty about wanting. Wanting is just being alive with your hand open. But in the strange economy of how humans read one another, the open, visible hand says lack, and lack reads as lower worth. And so the very gesture that is meant to draw someone closer becomes the gesture that tells them to discount you. The chase broadcasts the one fact that defeats the chase. That is the paradox, and we will turn it over many times tonight, from many sides gently, the way you turn a smooth stone in your palm in the dark. And underneath even that, holding it all up like the floor beneath the floor, is the law Waller named in 1938. The principle of least interest. In any bond between two people, the one who is less invested holds the power. Not because they are cruel, not because they planned it, but simply because power, in its quietest form, is nothing more than the asymmetry of stakes. Whoever has less to lose can set the terms. Whoever needs the outcome less can shape it. It is not a trick anyone performs, it is structural, like water finding the low ground. The one who cares less is simply standing on higher ground and everything tilts toward them. So when you feel powerless in some bond, with a person you love or a room at work you are trying to win, notice that the powerlessness is rarely about your worth as a human being. It is about the distribution of stakes. You have staked everything on this one outcome, and they have staked very little, and that gap is the whole of the power gap, which means the way out is not what the loud voices say. It is not to care less, to manufacture a cold indifference you do not feel. You cannot fake your way up the higher ground. The faking leaks too, and we will see exactly why. The way out is gentler and far harder. It is to need less. To widen your life until no single person and no single outcome is carrying the entire weight of your worth. So that this conversation, this text, this meeting, this room, is one warm thing among many warm things and not the only fire in an otherwise cold field. There is a study you may have encountered in a different form, but its original shape is this. In 1975, two researchers named Stephen Warchel and Jerry Lee, working with Darwin Adewole, put people in a room and asked them to taste and rate chocolate chip cookies. In some conditions, there were 10 cookies in the jar. In others, there were only 2. The cookies were identical, same batch, same oven, same day. And yet the cookies from the nearly empty jar were rated as more desirable, more attractive, simply better. 2 cookies, 10 cookies, same cookie, different value in the mind that reached for them. Robert Cialdini, who spent years studying the mechanics of persuasion, made this study famous. He called the underlying principle scarcity, and he placed it among the most reliable levers of human judgment. We assign greater worth to things that are rare and less worth to things that are everywhere. This is not vanity. It is not foolishness. It is something older than vanity, older than foolishness, something wired into the part of the brain that existed long before we had words for wanting. Scarce things historically mattered. They were the resources that could run out, the opportunities that would not come again. The brain learned to covet them automatically before the thinking mind had time to weigh in. And now it applies to cookies. It applies to first edition books and limited run shoes and concert tickets about to sell out. It applies, whether we are comfortable admitting this or not, to people. When you are always available, when you answer the moment the message arrives, when you rearrange yourself to accommodate any request, when you never have somewhere else to be, you are presenting a full jar, 10 cookies. And the jar being full is not a cruelty. It is not a statement about your character, but it does something quiet and automatic to the mind perceiving you. Abundance lowers the value the mind assigns, not because you are worth less, but because the brain is running a program that was never designed to calculate human worth fairly. It was designed to identify which resources deserve vigilance and effort, and it does this by measuring how hard they are to come by. This is not about playing games. It is not about the advice you have probably heard, the wait 3 days to text back rule, the manufactured delay, the performed unavailability that is all performance and no truth. That version of this principle is both brittle and dishonest, and it fails for a reason we will arrive at. The real thing, the version that is durable, is not a tactic at all. It is fullness. It is a life that actually has other places to be, other people to attend to, other things that matter, not fabricated scarcity. Genuine scarcity of your time because your time is genuinely full. The distinction matters enormously, and it matters for a reason that a different branch of science makes clear. Amos Zahavi was an Israeli biologist who spent time in the 1970s watching birds, and what he saw troubled him. The peacock's tail, for instance, is absurd by any standard of survival. It is heavy, it is conspicuous, it slows the bird down and makes it easier for predators to find. And yet it persisted. Evolution, which is a process of ruthless editing, had not simply eliminated the peacock's tail across millions of years. By any clean logic, it should have. A peacock with a smaller, lighter, more practical tail should have survived better, bred more, passed on more genes. The ornament should have been trimmed away. And it wasn't. Zahavi asked why, and the answer he arrived at, which he published in 1975, is one of those ideas that feels obvious once you hear it and was nevertheless genuinely hard to see. The signal persists, he argued, precisely because it is expensive. The peacock's tail does not survive in spite of being a handicap. It survives because it is a handicap. The cost is the whole point. Think about it this way. Imagine two peacocks announcing to the world that they are strong and healthy. One of them has a modest tail, easy to carry, low cost. The other drags 20 pounds of iridescent plumage through the undergrowth every day of its life and is still alive. Which one is more believable? The one who paid nothing to make the claim, or the one who paid something real and is still standing? The tail is credible precisely because you cannot fake the tail. You either survive it or you do not. The cost is the proof. Alan Greifan formalized this mathematically in 1990, showing that Zahavi's intuition held up under rigorous modeling. For a signal to be honest and stable in a population, it must be costly in a way that only genuinely high-quality individuals can afford to pay. A cheap signal can be counterfeited, an expensive one cannot. Now apply that to people, not to tails, but to the particular signal we have been circling around. Chasing someone's approval is not free. It costs time, attention, emotional energy, the vulnerability of visible wanting. But here is the thing, it is not costly in the right direction. It is not a signal that only high-quality individuals can afford. Anyone who wants something badly enough will pay that cost. Desperation is the cheapest signal in the world because literally anyone can be desperate. It does not distinguish you, it does not prove your worth. It proves the opposite, it proves the wanting. And as we established in the section before this one, visible wanting broadcasts that you do not already have what you are reaching for. Now consider the opposite, not chasing. Remaining calm when someone pulls away. Not rewriting a text you sent 3 minutes ago because they haven't replied. Staying present in a meeting without performing for the room. Declining an invitation without guilt. Being genuinely, fully available for the things that matter to you without bending yourself around someone else's orbit. This is expensive. It is expensive in a very specific way. You can only afford to not chase something if you have options elsewhere. You can only afford the calm of not needing this particular outcome if you have other outcomes available, other people who matter, other possibilities open. The person who can walk away and be fine is the person who has something to walk toward. That is not a small thing. That is the rarest and most costly signal you can send, because it is the one signal the social brain recognizes as unfakeable. You cannot cheaply pretend that you have options when you do not. You can try. And the attempt leaks. It leaks through the micro-timing of when you look at your phone. It leaks through the slight over-control in your voice when the subject comes up. It leaks through the way your body stiffens when things are uncertain. The brain of the person you are with is very old. It was reading these signals long before language arrived. It does not need you to announce your desperation. It catches it the way a hand catches heat from a fire before the mind has processed that anything is happening. This is why genuine detachment is the only version that works. Not performed detachment, not manufactured unavailability, not the cold shoulders and deliberate silences of tactical game playing. Those are all cheap attempts at an expensive signal, and they fail precisely because they are cheap, because the real calm underneath is absent, and the absence is detectable. The only path to the signal is to actually have options, to actually build a life wide enough that no single person and no single outcome is the whole of it. Which brings us back to Waller and the flaw beneath everything. Power flows toward the one who needs less, not as a moral judgment, not as a game, but as the structural consequence of having more to fall back on. There is, sitting next to all of this, a third force, quieter than scarcity, quieter than costly signaling, but perhaps the most familiar when you have felt it in your own body. Jack Brame was a psychologist who in 1966 named something most people had already lived but nobody had quite formalized. He called it psychological reactance. The idea is this: people experience their freedom to choose as something close to precious, not in the dramatic sense, not as a political philosophy, but in the immediate gut-level sense that there are things I am allowed to want and not want, to approach and to step back from, and that right of approach and withdrawal belongs to me. When that feeling of freedom is threatened, when something in the environment starts to feel like pressure, like you are being herded toward an outcome you did not choose, the mind recoils. Not deliberately, not as a decision, as a reflex. The recoil is automatic and often stronger than the original inclination. Think of a moment when someone pushed you too hard to like something, a restaurant, a song, a person they thought you should admire. And notice how the pushing itself made you less likely to like the thing, even if you might have arrived there on your own. The more they insisted, the more something in you resisted. That was not stubbornness, or not only stubbornness, that was reactance. The sense of, this is becoming a demand on my preferences, and my preferences are mine to have. Now apply it to pursuit. When someone pursues you too visibly, too insistently, the pursuit carries a pressure. It says, in the wordless language of behavior, you should want me, you should respond, you should reciprocate. The phrasing is never that explicit, but the weight of it lands that way. And the other person's autonomy brain, the old part that guards freedom of feeling, pushes back. Not because the pursuer is bad, not because the desire itself is wrong, but because the pursuit has the shape of pressure, and pressure triggers withdrawal as surely as a hand on a hot surface triggers pulling away. Here is the cruel geometry of it. The person pursuing notices the withdrawal. They read it as distance, as the other person slipping away. And they respond the way you respond when something is slipping, by trying harder. More messages, more effort, more demonstration. And every additional attempt is additional pressure, which amplifies the reactance, which accelerates the withdrawal, which looks like more distance, which produces more pursuit. The loop is merciless and self-reinforcing, and neither person inside it can clearly see why it is happening. Bream's reactance theory explains why playing it cool as a deliberate strategy fails even when it is executed competently. Because if the cool is a strategy, it is still in service of pursuit. The person is still trying to get the outcome. They have simply added a layer of performance on top of the wanting, and the wanting is still present underneath, still broadcasting, still doing the work that signals low value. Reactance is not solved by suppressing the visible signs of pursuit. It is resolved when the pursuit actually softens, when the pressure genuinely lifts, when the other person's autonomy is no longer being implicitly asked to answer for something. And that happens when you actually stop needing the particular answer, not when you pretend to stop, when you actually do. Take a slow breath here if you want to, there is no hurry. These things are worth sitting with for a moment. The way water finds the low ground, the way costs make signals credible, the way pressure makes freedom defend itself. These are not personal failings, they are mechanics. They were running before you arrived and they will run after you leave, in every room and every relationship and every meeting you will ever have. Understanding them does not make them go away, but it changes what you do with your hands. When you are ready, there is one more force. Elaine Hatfield and her colleagues, John Cacioppo and Richard Rapson, published research in 1993 on a phenomenon they called emotional contagion. The finding is old now, but it has not lost its strangeness. Emotions, they found, are not contained inside the person feeling them. They spread, not through words, not through deliberate communication, but through something far more automatic, the mimicry of facial expressions, posture, movement, and tone of voice that happens below the level of awareness. You see someone frowning and the muscles around your own mouth make a tiny, barely detectable pull toward the same expression. You hear someone speak in a tight, pressured voice and something in your chest tightens in the same key. You are not deciding to do this. Your body is doing it, and your mind reads the resulting physical state and calls it feeling. This is how moods travel through a room without anyone meaning to transmit them. It is how one anxious person on a team can make an entire meeting feel slightly frantic. It is how grief in a house sits in the air. It is how you sometimes leave a conversation feeling heavy without being able to point to anything that was said. And it is how neediness is physiologically aversive, quite apart from any judgment about the person showing it. When someone is trying too hard, their body is in a state. Their nervous system is elevated. There is a low current of urgency in the way they hold themselves, the way they speak slightly faster than is comfortable, the way their eyes are working a little harder than the situation calls for. They are in a state of wanting that is not yet having, which is physiologically indistinguishable from a mild kind of alarm, and the people around them catch it, not through any act of interpretation, not through reading behavior and making conclusions, through the automatic, ancient machinery of mimicry that Hatfield and Cacioppo and Rapson documented. The body of the person nearby mirrors the state, begins to feel something like the tightness and the urgency, and the mind labels that internal state as discomfort and looks for the source. The source is the person trying too hard, and the most immediate resolution of the discomfort is to create distance from the source. This is why they could feel the desperation is not a metaphor. It is closer to literal than we usually give it credit for. The desperation is a physiological state that spreads through the mechanisms of emotional contagion, and the people around it are not just observing it. They are briefly, minutely experiencing it in their own bodies, and then moving away from the experience. This changes something about how we understand the whole problem. We have been talking since the beginning about signals and information and what behaviors broadcast to observers. All of that is true, but emotional contagion adds a layer that is not about signals at all. It is about comfort. The person trying too hard is not just sending a low-value signal. They are also producing an uncomfortable internal state in the people around them. And people move away from discomfort. They do not need a reason. They do not need to explain it, even to themselves. They simply feel vaguely tighter and slightly less easy in this person's presence, and they gravitate elsewhere. This is why it can feel so confusing from the inside. You have not done anything overtly wrong. You have not said anything offensive. You have been generous, attentive, eager to please. And yet people are quieter around you, slower to invite you in, quicker to end the conversation, and you cannot get anyone to explain why, because they do not have an explanation. They have a feeling, a mild discomfort, a slight preference for elsewhere. And feelings of that kind do not come with footnotes. The contagion framework also explains something about why the anxiety escalates, because the person trying too hard eventually notices the distance, even if they cannot name what is causing it. They feel the room becoming harder to win, and that feeling is itself a new source of anxiety, which adds to the existing state, which amplifies what is being broadcast, which reaches the people around them with greater intensity, which creates more discomfort, which produces more distance. The loop that Brahms' reactance theory describes from the outside, emotional contagion describes from the inside. It is felt as a rising tide of trying that seems to generate its own resistance. Put the four of them together now and hold them lightly. Scarcity and the mind's habit of discounting what is always available, costly signaling, and the way only genuinely expensive signals are believed, reactance, and the way pressure triggers withdrawal, not warmth, emotional contagion, and the way anxiety is caught before it is understood. These are not four separate problems, they are four expressions of the same underlying architecture. The human social brain, which is very old and very fast, is running a continuous background calculation about every person in its environment. What does this person's presence cost me, and what is this person worth? It is not doing this cruelly, it is not doing this consciously. It is doing it the way the digestive system does its work, below the surface, automatically, constantly, in service of some ancient mandate about safety and resource and belonging. And trying too hard disrupts that calculation in a specific direction, every time. It registers as cost. The other person's urgency raises my arousal, threatens my autonomy, signals that they have no other options, and makes the interaction feel like an obligation. And the brain's response to cost is to look for the exit, not necessarily with malice, often with genuine warmth for the person, even with care and tenderness, but with a steady, below-the-surface preference for the kind of presence that does not cost anything, for the person who makes you feel comfortable rather than needed, for the quiet room over the one that is straining. And now consider the reverse, the person in the room who is not trying to win the room, who says what they think without staging it for approval, who disagrees without apologizing for the disagreement, who laughs without checking first that it is appropriate to laugh, who is comfortable in a silence without rushing to fill it. What is it that makes that person magnetic? And notice that it is not one quality, not confidence in the simple, circular sense. It is something more structural. They are not transmitting urgency, so you catch none. They are not threatening your autonomy, so no part of you withdraws. Their presence is plentiful in quality and scarce in desperation, and the brain assigns value accordingly, and they are paying visibly the cost of not needing the room's approval, which means their ease has to be earned and real, which means the costly signal machinery treats it as credible. None of this requires being cold. None of this requires performing indifference. You can be warm, fully, and genuinely warm without needing the warmth returned. You can be generous, curious, interested, present. None of those qualities are the problem. The quality that is the problem is the needing. The slight elevation in stakes that makes every response carry too much weight, that makes every silence a threat, that makes every unreturned gesture a small emergency. And that quality, that needing, is not fixed. It is not a permanent feature of who you are. It is a consequence of what you have staked on a particular outcome, and stakes can be redistributed, but that is ahead of us. For now, let this settle. A jar with 10 cookies rating lower in the mind of the person who reaches in. A peacock's tail, costly enough to be credible, dragged through the undergrowth as proof. A hand pulled back from a flame before the mind has caught up. An anxiety rising in a room without anyone saying a word. 4 mechanisms. 1 direction. The room knows before you do. The pull toward elsewhere begins before anyone has a conscious thought, and the pulling away is not a verdict on who you are. It is a response to what is being transmitted below the level of intention through the old and very fast machinery of social perception. There is something worth lingering with here, something that might feel uncomfortable before it starts to feel like relief. Everything described so far runs on both sides of the encounter below awareness. The person trying too hard does not know in most moments that they are leaking the signal. They feel only the wanting, the caring, the effort. From the inside, the trying feels like investment, like love, like conscientiousness. The checking of the phone feels like reasonable attention. The follow-up message feels like clarity or warmth. The extra justification in the meeting feels like thoroughness. None of it feels like desperation, because desperation is not how it presents to the person inside it. It presents as caring. It presents as effort. It presents as the most reasonable response to a situation that matters. And on the other side, the person who is pulling away does not know why they are pulling away. They have no clear language for what they are responding to. They might say, if pressed, that something feels a little much, or that the interaction leaves them slightly tired, or that they find themselves wanting a bit more space. But pressed harder, they would struggle to point to a specific behavior and name it as the cause, because the cause is not a single behavior. It is the cumulative effect of the state being broadcast, of the urgency being caught, of the subtle pressure on their autonomy being registered. It is the jar being too full for the discount not to apply. The invisibility on both sides is what makes this so difficult to address in the ordinary way. You cannot simply decide not to want something. You cannot tell yourself to relax and have the relaxation arrive because you asked for it. Deciding not to lean forward is not the same as not leaning. The body keeps the wanting regardless of what the mind instructs, and the other person cannot tell you what is happening because they genuinely do not know. The pulling away is the body's answer to a question the mind has not yet asked. What changes the equation is not a decision made in the moment of a particular interaction. It is something prior to all of it. Something structural, the way the floor is prior to the furniture. It is where your worth lives and how many places it lives, and whether any one conversation or approval or outcome is carrying more of that weight than a single thing can safely hold. We will come to that properly in a little while. For now, hold the mechanics, let them be real. The scarcity discount that runs without permission. The costly signal that only genuine alternatives can produce. The reactance that meets pressure with withdrawal. The anxiety that crosses the air between bodies before anyone has spoken. These are not theories about other people. If you are listening to this quietly, in the dark or the quiet, some part of you already recognizes them from both sides. From the side that pulled away from something and did not know why, and from the side that tried harder and watched things get worse and could not understand the geometry of it. That recognition is the beginning of something, not a cure, not a technique, but a shift in what you are seeing. And once you can see the mechanics clearly, you stop spending your energy on the wrong levers. Rest in that for a moment. The room is quiet. The night is long. There is more to walk through together, and none of it is in a hurry. Take a slow, deep breath if you like. Notice what has settled in you since we began. Notice whether anything has softened or whether something has simply become more visible. The mechanics are not judgments. They do not mean you have been doing it wrong. They mean you have been doing a very human thing in a very human situation, and the situation has rules that nobody clearly explained, and now some of those rules are becoming visible. When you are ready, we will continue. Because there is something that follows from all of this, something that lives in the specific rooms where the mechanics play out most visibly, most painfully, most personally. The room where you are reaching towards someone you want, and the room where you are trying to prove your worth to people who hold power over your livelihood. Both rooms, because the title of this promised you both, and both deserve their full weight. What happens in those rooms when the mechanics run is specific and recognizable, and it is worth naming slowly, carefully, so that when you see it, you know what you are looking at. But that is the next passage. For now, let the four forces settle. Scarcity, costly signaling, reactance, contagion, four names for the same old, fast, invisible architecture, the one that runs in every room, every relationship, every moment of visible wanting. The jar with 2 cookies always more desirable than the jar with 10. So let us begin in the first room. The room where the wanting is most acute, most animal, most difficult to reason your way out of. The room where the mechanics do not care that you know about them, because knowing and feeling are very different things, and the heart does not take instruction well. Attachment researchers have been studying this room for decades. John Bowlby first mapped the territory working in the mid-20th century with children who had been separated from their caregivers, watching what they did, what they needed, how they behaved when the person they depended on was present, and how they fell apart or shut down when that person was absent. He was looking for something he called the attachment behavioral system, the deep, ancient circuitry that every human being carries, a system whose single purpose is to keep you close to the person you depend on for safety and survival. In infancy, it is obvious and visible. Cry when she leaves. Reach when she comes back. Settle only when you are held. But the system does not disappear when you grow up. It goes quiet, buries itself in the ordinary texture of adult life, and then resurfaces, sudden, overwhelming, and difficult to make sense of, the moment you begin to care about someone. Deeply care. The kind of caring that has stakes. The kind of caring where their opinion of you begins to feel like something you cannot afford to lose. Cindy Hazan and Philip Shaver extended Bowlby's work into adult romantic relationships in the late 1980s, and what they found was that the patterns established in childhood, the ways we learn to navigate closeness and distance, availability and withdrawal, show up again in full force in adult partnership. We do not simply choose our emotional styles as adults. We carry them, often without knowing what we are carrying, and the pattern most relevant to this particular room is what researchers call anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is not a character defect. It is not weakness. It is a learned response often formed early in relationships where love felt conditional or where presence was inconsistent, where the caregiver was sometimes warm and sometimes cold, sometimes available and sometimes absent in ways that felt unpredictable to a child who could not yet understand adult complexity and therefore concluded that the inconsistency must be about them, must mean something about their own worth, must require vigilance to manage. And so the anxiously attached person learns to watch, learns to be exquisitely sensitive to shifts in the other person's mood, responsiveness, tone, availability, learns to read every pause, every shortened message, every slight withdrawal, not as the ordinary fluctuation of a person with their own inner life, but as a signal, a data point, evidence perhaps that something is wrong, evidence that needs to be resolved. Mario Mikulinsa and Philip Shaver, who have produced some of the most comprehensive research on adult attachment, describe what happens when the anxiously attached person perceives a threat to their connection with someone they care about. They call it hyperactivation of the attachment system. The system turns up, not down. It becomes louder, more insistent, more urgent. It generates what they call protest behaviors. The name is apt. Protest behaviors are exactly what they sound like. Behaviors whose purpose is to protest the felt withdrawal, to reverse it, to get the connection back. More contact, more messages, more reaching, more reassurance seeking, more checking, more questions designed to test whether the other person is still there, still interested, still committed. The behavior escalates in direct proportion to the felt threat. which is to say, it escalates precisely as the other person begins to pull back. And here is the architecture of the trap. The protest behaviors are an attempt to restore closeness. They are motivated by genuine care, genuine desire, genuine investment in the relationship, but from the outside, from the position of the person receiving them, they do not read as care. They read as pressure. They read as need. They read as the very thing that triggers reactance that Jack Brame identified in 1966, the sense that one's freedom to choose is being threatened, the automatic push toward distance to restore that freedom. The pursuit triggers the withdrawal triggers more pursuit. And the loop tightens with every pass. There is something almost unbearably sad about this when you see it clearly. The person doing the reaching is reaching because they care. The person stepping back is stepping back not because they are cruel, but because something in the dynamic has begun to feel suffocating, and they cannot always articulate what it is, only that they need air. And the gap widens, and the reaching intensifies, and neither person quite understands what is happening or how to stop it. Mikulinsa and Shaver documented this in their book, Attachment in Adulthood, and what they found is that the protest behaviors that anxious attachment generates is the escalating contact seeking, the hypervigilance, the reassurance seeking, do not achieve their aim. They do not restore closeness. They accelerate its loss. The more loudly the attachment system protests, the more quickly the other person learns to associate the relationship with a specific kind of internal discomfort. And people move toward comfort and away from discomfort. That is not a moral judgment. It is closer to a physical law. Rest in that for a moment because it matters. The problem is not that the anxiously attached person is unlovable. The problem is that the machinery they are running, the ancient, well-intentioned machinery that was built to keep them safe, is now running in a context where it produces the opposite of what it was designed for. It was built for a world where louder protest brought the caregiver back. In adult romantic life, louder protest sends the partner in the other direction. The reassurance-seeking loop is worth pausing on specifically because it is so recognizable and so easy to miss in the moment. It works like this. The anxiously attached person feels uncertain about where they stand, uncertain about how the other person feels, uncertain about the relationship's security. This uncertainty is uncomfortable, genuinely, physiologically uncomfortable, and so they seek reassurance. They ask. They look for confirmation, sometimes directly. Are we okay? Do you still care about me? Are you happy with us? Sometimes indirectly, fishing for compliments, looking for the other person to spontaneously offer warmth that hasn't been asked for, reading into small behaviors for evidence of continued interest. And the reassurance, when it comes, provides relief. Momentary, genuine relief. The system quiets briefly. But here is what it does not do. It does not resolve the underlying uncertainty. It does not address whatever made the system feel threatened in the first place. It is a patch, not a repair, and patches wear out. Within hours or days, sometimes within minutes, the uncertainty creeps back. The system activates again. The reassurance is needed again. And each time the cycle runs, something accumulates. Not just the behavioral pattern, but a perception. The other person begins slowly to experience the relationship as requiring a particular kind of emotional labor that was not in the original offering. They begin to feel dimly at first and then more clearly that their attention and reassurance are not being received as gifts but as necessities, that their positive regard is not landing and staying but being processed and immediately needed again. Over time, this changes how their approval feels to them to give. It begins to feel less like warmth and more like maintenance, less like love and more like management. And as it begins to feel like management, the dynamic that follows from Willard Waller's principle of least interest, from the simple structural reality that the person investing less holds the power, tips further in the wrong direction for the person doing the reaching. Each reassurance-seeking cycle, even when it produces momentary relief, trains both people a little more deeply into the asymmetry. Jennifer Crocker's research on contingencies of self-worth, published with Connie Wolf in Psychological Review in 2001, sits underneath all of this like a foundation. Crocker, working at the University of Michigan, was trying to understand why some people's self-esteem fluctuates so dramatically with external feedback. A compliment, and they feel extraordinary; a slight, and they feel worthless, while others seem to carry a more stable sense of themselves. What she found was that the key variable is where you locate the evidence for your own worth. When your self-esteem is contingent on others' approval, when you are, in her terms, basing your self-worth on what others think of you, you are essentially placing your psychological stability in someone else's hands. And that arrangement has consequences. People whose worth is staked on external approval, Crocker's research showed, experience greater stress, more relationship conflict, worse mental health outcomes, and critically, they behave more needily in exactly the situations where the stakes feel highest. Because when your worth is contingent on someone's approval, every interaction with that person is high stakes in a way that it simply is not for someone whose sense of themselves does not depend on the outcome. Think about what that asymmetry looks like from the outside. For you, the conversation is load-bearing. Your sense of yourself rests at least partly on how it goes. Every small cue you receive is being processed for what it says about your value. For the other person, the conversation may simply be a conversation, an ordinary human exchange with no particular weight attached. They are not scanning for evidence of their own worth, they are just talking. That difference in stakes is felt, not always consciously, not always in words, but felt. And what it produces is exactly the behavioral signature that reads as trying too hard, the slight over-attentiveness, the small tilt toward them in every choice, the laughter that comes just a fraction too readily, the silence filled a beat too quickly. None of it is calculated. All of it is the natural, almost inevitable product of a system running in high alert mode because the outcome feels existentially important. Now let us bring in what happens with compliments. Because this is one of the places where the mechanism is most clearly visible and most easily misread. When someone is trying to win approval, one of the most natural impulses is to offer approval, to tell the other person how wonderful they are, how impressive, how attractive, how fascinating. The logic is intuitive. I want to be liked, they want to feel good, so I will make them feel good, and they will associate that good feeling with me. A transaction, simple and warm. But this logic runs into the same trouble as all the others, because it ignores what value does in a system governed by scarcity. Your approval is a currency. It has worth to the degree that it is not freely available. If you offer it lavishly, immediately, and constantly, if every small thing the other person does is extraordinary, if they are brilliant and beautiful and fascinating and endlessly interesting, regardless of what they actually say or do, then your approval loses its purchasing power. Not because people are ungrateful, but because the mind is built to discount what is abundant. Robert Cialdini's synthesis of this principle, drawn from decades of behavioral research, including Stephen Warchell's 1975 cookie jar study, is simply this. We want what is scarce, we discount what is everywhere. In the cookie jar study, people reliably rated the same cookies as more desirable, more attractive, and better tasting when there were only 2 left in the jar than when the jar was full. Same cookies, same recipe. Different perceived value, entirely a function of supply. Your evaluative attention works the same way. If you are the person who finds everyone remarkable, who lavishes early and constant praise, who texts at midnight to say they haven't been able to stop thinking about the other person after 3 conversations, then the currency of your attention inflates. It becomes ordinary. It stops meaning what you need it to mean. Worse, it signals something. Recall the observability paradox from earlier, the one that lives underneath all of this. Visible wanting is evidence you don't already have what you want, and the brain reads doesn't already have it as lower value. Lavish, early, constant compliments are a form of visible wanting. They say plainly through the channel of behavior, even when the words say something else entirely. I need you to feel favorably toward me. I am paying in advance. I am trying to ensure the outcome because I am not certain the outcome is already mine. And the social brain, running its ancient, fast, below-conscious calculations, reads that signal accurately. None of this means you should withhold genuine appreciation when you feel it. The distinction that matters is the distinction between approval offered because you mean it, and approval offered because you need something in return, because you are trying to purchase a response. The first can be read, the second can also be read, and both leave traces. Conversational overpursuit is the real-time version of this same phenomenon. It is harder to name because it happens in the flow of an actual exchange, in the moment when you are already in the grip of the dynamic you are trying to navigate. The signature behaviors are recognizable once you know what to look for. Filling every silence before it has time to breathe, asking a question and then, before the answer has fully arrived, offering another question, as if the space between words is dangerous and must be occupied. Laughing too readily, not because something is genuinely funny, but because laughter is a bid for warmth, an offer of approval, a small performance of ease that is itself evidence of unease, explaining more than was asked. Taking a conversational thread and running with it past the point where the other person's interest is present, because the silence that might follow a shorter answer feels riskier than the risk of saying too much. All of it again is motivated by care, by genuine interest, by wanting the exchange to go well, but the person on the receiving end experiences it not as care, but as texture, as a quality of the air between you, and that quality, slightly pressured, slightly effortful, slightly too eager to be received, is the texture of trying too hard, and it registers in the same ancient, fast, below-conscious channel where all of these signals register. Howard Giles, whose communication accommodation theory maps how people adjust their speech patterns and conversational behavior in relation to others, identified something quietly important in this territory. In any interaction, the person with lower perceived status tends to accommodate, to adjust, to match, to defer, while the person with higher perceived status tends to hold their ground. And that accommodation, when it is driven by approval seeking rather than genuine responsiveness, is itself readable. The conversation of someone who needs the exchange to go well has a particular shape. It leans in, it adjusts, it gives ground before the ground has been asked for. And the leaning, the adjusting, the preemptive giving of ground, these are the conversational equivalent of the shrunken posture, the over-apology, the lavish compliment. They tell the story below the words. This is the doom spiral, and it deserves to be named clearly because naming it is the only way out of it. The spiral works in steps, and each step follows from the last with a terrible logic. You care about someone. Caring is good, it is the whole point, but caring activates your attachment system, and if your worth is staked on their approval, the caring feels high stakes, and high stakes activates the system into a higher gear. The higher gear produces the behaviors, the extra texts, the lavish attention, the filled silences, the reassurance seeking, the protest behaviors when they pull back. The behaviors register below conscious as low-value signals, visible wanting, cost paid for approval, scarcity signaling gone backwards. The other person does not always know what they are registering. They experience it as a feeling, a slight withdrawal of ease, a small reduction in the pull they felt before. They take a half step back. You feel the half step back. Your system, tuned to detect exactly this kind of withdrawal, catches it immediately and interprets it as a threat. The threat activates the system further. The behaviors escalate. More contact, more effort, more visible wanting. And Zayonta's boundary condition comes in here, the one from 1968, the one that was seeded in the first passage and pays off now. Mere exposure increases liking only when the baseline is neutral or positive. Once the baseline has tipped, once you have crossed the threshold from welcome presence to pressure, more exposure does not restore the positive impression. It deepens the negative one. The door that repetition would have opened now has repetition pushing it closed a little more with every knock. The chaser, watching the door, interprets the closing as evidence that they have not tried hard enough, that if only they could find the right word, the right gesture, the right proof of their feeling, the door would open. And so they knock again, and the door closes further. There is nothing uniquely pathological about the person caught in this spiral. It is a trap that almost any combination of real caring, contingent self-worth, and an anxious attachment pattern will produce, given the right circumstances and a partner whose withdrawal, however unconscious, triggers the protest system. The spiral does not require bad intentions from anyone, it just requires the mechanics to run. What stops it is not trying harder. What stops it is understanding that the trying itself is the problem, not the solution, and sitting with that understanding long enough for it to become real. Take a breath, let that settle for a moment. The night is still here. The quiet is still here. What has just been named is heavy, because it is true and because many people listening to this have lived it, have been the one knocking, or have been the one stepping back, or both, at different points in their life. All of it is worth meeting with some gentleness rather than judgment. When you are ready, let us walk out of the first room and into the second. The second room has different furniture and different stakes, but the same mechanics run in it, and they can be just as quietly costly. This is the room where your livelihood lives, where you are trying to prove your worth not to someone you love, but to people who evaluate you, promote you, pass you over, give you the project, or leave you off the list. The workplace. And what happens there when the same impulse, the visible trying, the effortful pursuit of approval, turns its energy toward professional status is worth understanding in some detail, because the dynamics are both similar to the romantic ones and specifically different in ways that matter. Laurie Rudman, a social psychologist whose work on self-promotion in professional contexts is among the most careful and most cited in this territory, identified something she called the self-promotion paradox. Though the word paradox does not quite do justice to how precisely uncomfortable its logic is, the paradox goes like this. In any professional environment, some level of self-advocacy is necessary. Organizations are not mind-reading operations. If you do not surface your own contributions, do not make your capabilities legible to the people who make decisions, do not advocate for yourself to some degree, you will be invisible in ways that have real costs. This is simply true, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But there is a ceiling, and above that ceiling, self-promotion does not keep paying off. Above the ceiling, it reverses. Rudman's research found that people who engage in aggressive self-promotion, who are conspicuously, insistently, loudly trying to be seen as competent, face a specific kind of backlash, not universal contempt, nothing so simple as that, but a subtle and persistent discounting that manifests in how likable they are perceived to be, in how trustworthy, in how often they are actually selected for high-status opportunities relative to quieter, equally competent peers. What the research identifies underneath this backlash is a version of the same mechanism that runs in the dating room. When someone is visibly, effortfully trying to be perceived as impressive, the very visibility of the effort sends a competing signal. The signal is, I am not confident that my work speaks for itself. I need to manage your impression of me. I am paying a cost to be seen a certain way. And as we established in the second passage with Zahavi's costly signaling theory and the handicap principle, a signal that requires visible effort to maintain is a less credible signal than one that requires none. The gazelle leaping with grace, the peacock whose tail actually slows it down. Credibility comes from cost, and the most expensive signals are the ones that arise naturally from having real capacity, not from performing it. The professional who trusts their work to make their case, who speaks when spoken to rather than continuously lobbying, who demonstrates competence by being competent rather than by describing themselves as competent, sends a signal that is structurally harder to fake. The ease of not requiring constant management of others' impressions is itself evidence of security, and security reads in the social brain's fast ancient calculations as a marker of someone who has no need to manufacture their own status because the status is real. There is a particular texture to the person in a meeting room who is trying too hard to be seen as sharp. They speak slightly too much. They reach for the summary a beat before it is needed. They volunteer information about their own contributions before the conversation has landed on a place where contributions are being assessed. They laugh at the right status person's jokes with an enthusiasm that is fractionally more than the jokes warrant. They volunteer agreement before they have had time to actually assess whether they agree. None of these behaviors are deceptive. None of them are consciously performed most of the time. They are the professional equivalent of the protest behaviors Mikulinsa and Shaver documented. The same attachment system running in a different room with different furniture and different stakes, but the same ancient machinery. And the people on the receiving end of these behaviors, the colleagues, the managers, the evaluators, do not consciously calculate their response. They feel something, a quality, a slight sense that there is effort visible behind the presentation, that the person is working to produce an impression rather than simply being themselves working. And that quality, even when it cannot be named, registers as a form of lower status. Not because the person is actually less competent, but because the effort signal and the status signal run in opposite directions. Susan Fisk's stereotype content model, developed at Princeton, identifies two axes along which we evaluate other people: warmth and competence. We want to know at the deepest level whether you mean well toward us and whether you are capable of acting effectively in the world. Most of the time in professional settings, what is being sought is perceived competence, the sense that you know what you are doing and do not require management. And there is a particular trap that trying too hard creates in this dimension, in the effort to appear warm and likable and eager, in the hunger for social approval. The competence dimension can take a quiet hit. The person who is working hard to be liked sometimes reads, to the social brain doing its fast categorization, as someone who is prioritizing approval over effectiveness. And effectiveness, calm, undefended, unmanaged effectiveness, is what professional respect runs on. This is where Julian Kruger and his colleagues' finding about the effort heuristic becomes something more complicated than it first appears. Kruger's team, working in 2004, documented what they called the effort heuristic. When evaluating products and outputs, people tend to rate items produced with more effort as more valuable. The painting that took 6 months over the one that took a day, even if observers cannot tell them apart visually. The gift that required sacrifice over the gift that came easily. Effort in the domain of objects and outputs registers as a positive signal. But here is the asymmetry, and it is the crux of everything this passage has been building toward. When the effort is aimed at a task, a problem, a craft, a creative output, a project, it reads as investment, as care, as mastery in progress. When the same effort is aimed at winning a person's approval, at being liked, at being seen as valuable, at securing someone's good opinion, it reads entirely differently. Same energy, opposite direction, opposite read. Because effort aimed at a task says, "This thing I am making matters to me, and I will give it what it deserves." But effort aimed at your approval says, "Your approval is what I need, which means I do not currently have it, which means it is not already freely mine, which means something about the balance of our exchange is being revealed in the aiming itself." That is the asymmetry, that is the crux. The effort on the craft, the late nights on the actual work, the investment in real skill and real output, all of that earns respect in any room. The effort aimed at being perceived a certain way by the people in the room earns the opposite, for the same reason that the jar with 2 cookies is more desirable than the jar with 10. The effort tells you about the supply, and supply determines value in a social economy just as surely as it does in any other. A person who is genuinely absorbed in their work, who comes to the meeting with something real to contribute and does not particularly seem to need the meeting to go well for them personally, carries something that is very difficult to manufacture and very easy to recognize when it is present. It is the quality of not needing, of having something real enough to do that the approval of this particular room is not the most important thing happening in their day. That quality is the professional version of the costly signal. It is credible because it is expensive. You can only afford not to need this outcome if you have other outcomes. You can only afford not to need this approval if you have other sources of value. The expensive part is not the behavior, not some performed indifference, some manufactured nonchalance. The expensive part is the reality underneath, a full enough professional life that this meeting, this evaluation, this particular person's good opinion is important but not existentially load-bearing, and that the reality underneath, rather than the performance of it, is what carries. It is what reads. It is what the ancient, fast, below-conscious system on the other side of every professional exchange is actually evaluating, even when neither person knows it. There is something else worth naming, something that runs across both rooms and deserves to be said plainly before we move further. The strategies that most self-help content offers in this territory tend to be behavioral. Wait before you respond. Hold back a compliment, let the silence sit, don't seem too eager. These strategies are not entirely wrong in their observation. They are pointing at a real dynamic, but they are attempting to solve a signaling problem with a performance. And the trouble is that real signals and performed signals are not the same thing, and the social brain, over time and across enough interactions, tends to sort them out. Faked detachment is a signal you cannot cheaply counterfeit. Not because people are unusually perceptive, though some are, but because real composure and performed composure feel different to be around. Real composure comes from having enough options, enough self-worth, enough other things that matter, that any single outcome is not catastrophic. And the person who has that composure genuinely does not need to manage it. It is simply present in how they listen, in how they respond, in the quality of the air around them when things are uncertain. Performed composure is different. Performed composure requires effort, and effort that is aimed at producing an impression, as we have just established, tends to leak in the direction of the thing it is trying to conceal. The person trying very hard to seem like they don't need this tends to be, paradoxically, quite readable, because not needing and trying to seem like not needing have different behavioral signatures, and those signatures show up in small ways, in timing, in the moments when the performance slips, in the micro tells that the social brain is specifically built to detect. This is not a counsel of despair. It is, if anything, the most useful thing that can be said in this territory. The behavioral fix is temporary at best and counterproductive at worst, because it adds a second layer of effort. The effort to conceal the first effort, an effort compounds. The durable path is not through the behavior, it is through the reality underneath it, through the interior architecture that the behavior is a symptom of. And the interior architecture has a name, and it has a mechanism, and it is worth understanding fully, not tonight, because the night has been full enough already, and the next passage will carry us there, into the root itself, the place where Crocker and Deci and Ryan and Fisher and Urey all converge on the same quiet, consequential truth. But first, let us rest here, let the two rooms settle in, the dating room and the workroom, and all the ways the same ancient machinery runs through both of them, the protest behaviors, the compliment inflation, the conversational over-pursuit, the self-promotion that tips past its useful ceiling and begins working against itself, the effort aimed at approval instead of aimed at the craft, carrying a signal it does not intend to send. All of it visible now, all of it legible in a way it perhaps was not an hour ago, and all of it, importantly, something you have seen in others, and probably seen in yourself at different moments and in different rooms. The person trying too hard to be liked at the party. The colleague who won't stop talking about their project's contribution. The late-night texts, the over-explained apology. The silence filled a beat too soon. These are not failures of character. They are the outputs of a system running at the wrong setting, in the wrong direction, producing the opposite of what it is designed to produce. And systems can be adjusted when you understand them clearly enough. Take a slow, deep breath. The room is quiet. You have been walking through a great deal tonight, and none of it was designed to be comfortable, only to be true. And true things sometimes need a little room to breathe before the next thing arrives. When you are ready, we will continue, because what remains is perhaps the most important part, the root beneath all of it, and the lever that changes not just the behavior, but the signal itself at the source. The thing that makes faking unnecessary because it addresses the reality rather than the presentation. The next passage will bring us there, slowly, without hurry. But there is one more thread to follow in this room before we step out of it fully. One more mechanism that runs in both the dating room and the workroom, and that bridges between what we have just named and where we are going. It is the mechanism of effort on the wrong target, seen from one more angle. Think about a musician practicing scales. There is something that nobody looking at that practice from the outside could possibly find unattractive. The dedication, the repetition, the willingness to sit with a difficult passage until it opens. The effort is visible, and the visibility of the effort does not diminish it. It adds to it, because the effort is aimed at the music. The musician is not trying to be impressive. They are trying to play the piece. The impressiveness, when it comes, is a byproduct. Now think about the same musician, the same talent, but now at a party, working very hard to ensure that everyone in the room knows they are a musician, knows about the difficulty of what they have mastered, knows that they spent years on the technique. The same person, the same actual skill. But the energy is now aimed at the room's perception rather than at the work itself. And something in that shift is readable. Something in it is slightly different in texture from the musician who simply plays when there is a piano in the corner without making a point of it. The effort heuristic, turned around, shows you exactly why. When effort is aimed at a task, we read the task as more valuable. When effort is aimed at impression management, we read the impression as less credible, because credible status does not require management. The musician who plays because there is a piano is more impressive than the musician who needs you to know they play. Same musician, same skill, different target of effort, opposite social read. This asymmetry lives underneath everything: the dating room, the workroom, the dinner party, the job interview, the first impression, and the 500th. The effort on the craft earns respect. The effort on the approval costs it. And the pivot between them, the thing that determines which direction the effort flows, is something interior. Something about where the worth is located, something about what the outcome needs to be. That is where the next passage lives, the root, the interior. The thing that when it shifts, changes everything else without requiring the effort of changing everything else. There is a behavior so common, so reflexive, that most people have never once paused to notice they are doing it. It happens in emails, it happens in conversations. It happens in the moment before you speak, when your nervous system is quietly calculating the odds that someone will push back. It sounds like this. Sorry to bother you, but sorry if this is a stupid question. Sorry, I just wanted to follow up. I know you're probably busy. Sorry. And here is the strange thing. The word comes from a real place. It comes from a genuine desire to be considerate, to not impose, to signal that you know you are making a request of someone's time. On the surface, it reads as thoughtful, as humble, as the thing a good person does. But underneath the surface, something else is being transmitted, and the person receiving it picks it up even when they cannot name it. Every unearned apology is a small admission, a quiet announcement that you expect the other person to find your presence an imposition. And when you expect to be an imposition, you are preparing the listener to agree with you. You are handing them the frame before they have even decided how to feel. The apology, when it is not connected to an actual mistake, says something specific. I already know that my claim on your attention is fragile. I am pre-apologizing because I do not fully expect it to hold. The research on over-apologizing is genuinely striking because it runs counter to what we assume about social smoothness. Karina Schumann and others who have studied the mechanics of apologies have found that excessive, unearned apologizing is associated with lower perceived competence, not lower warmth, lower competence. The over-apologizer is read below the level of anyone's deliberate judgment as someone who is less capable, less grounded, less sure of their standing. The apology that was supposed to make you appear considerate has instead telegraphed a kind of precariousness, and there is a darker mirror to this finding. In 2013, Tyler Okimoto and his colleagues at the University of Queensland published a study on what happens when people refuse to apologize. Not when they are cruel or dismissive, just when they hold their position and do not concede fault. What they found was unexpected. People who withheld apologies reported greater feelings of power and control after the interaction. They felt more confident, more self-consistent. The refusal, in other words, was not experienced as hostility. It was experienced as self-integrity. Now let us be careful here. This does not mean that refusing to apologize when you have actually done something wrong is a status strategy you should pursue. It is not. A real apology for a real wrong is among the most dignified things a person can do, and withholding it is not strength, it is just damage. What Okimoto's finding is pointing at is something more specific, that the refusal to concede ground you never actually owed is itself a form of signal. It says, I know what I did and did not do. I have a stable internal accounting. I do not need to preemptively manage your displeasure by offering fault I do not believe I carry. That stability, that internal accounting, is read. It lands in the other person as a signal about your self-concept. And self-concept, as we have been circling all along, is the root system of everything else. Take a moment with that. Breathe. Let your body be still. There is no urgency here, only the slow unwinding of something you may have been carrying for a long time. Let us keep going. If over-apologizing is the most audible status leak, over-explaining is the most revealing. It is quieter than the sorry. It is often mistaken for thoroughness, but its function, when you listen closely, is not to inform. Its function is to preempt criticism. Think about what over-explaining is, structurally. It is the act of providing justification before justification has been requested. You are defending a position that no one has yet attacked, and in doing so, you are revealing your expectation of attack. You are announcing before the other person has said a word that you believe your position is vulnerable, that you expect to be challenged, and that you are attempting to close off the challenge in advance. High-status communication, as Howard Giles and the researchers in the field of communication accommodation theory have documented, tends to be shorter, less hedged, and less defensive. The person who says it simply and then stops is communicating a specific thing. I do not anticipate that I will need to justify this. The person who says it then adds a parenthetical, then explains the reasoning behind the reasoning, then adds a note about their uncertainty, then softens the ending in case it landed wrong. That person is communicating something else entirely. They are doing, verbally, what the over-apologizer does tonally, pre-conceding the other person's right to find fault. Giles called the broader pattern accommodation. When two people interact, they tend to converge in vocabulary, in rhythm, in level of formality, and consistently the person with less perceived power accommodates more. They adjust. They align themselves to the other person's register. The over-explainer is accommodating in advance before they even know how the other person will respond. They have already made the calculation that the other person's judgment of them is more authoritative than their own, and their language is shaped by that calculation before a single word has been spoken in response. This is why over-explaining feels, to the person receiving it, like a kind of pressure. Not the pressure of being confronted, but the pressure of being handed responsibility. When someone over-explains a decision to you, part of what they are doing is placing your judgment above their own, and that placement asks something of you. It asks you to manage their anxiety about your opinion. Most people do not want that job. Most people would rather deal with someone who trusts their own read, even if they disagree with it, than someone who needs continuous reassurance that their read is acceptable. The over-explainer is, without intending it, making the conversation about themselves and their comfort with the outcome, and that is the opposite of the calm, grounded presence that reads as high status. Now we come to the body. This one is worth handling carefully because the science here has a complicated history, and it would be dishonest to present the simple version. In 2010, Amy Cuddy, Dana Carney, and Andy Yap published a paper on what they called power posing. The claim was that holding expansive, open postures for a brief period changed your hormonal state, cortisol down, testosterone up, and from that change, behavior and outcomes shifted. The paper went enormously viral. Cuddy's TED Talk became one of the most watched of all time. The message was, stand like a superhero for 2 minutes before a job interview, and it will change how you perform. Then the replications began. In 2015, Eva Rainer-Hill and her colleagues ran a large, pre-registered replication and found that the hormonal effects did not hold. The cortisol and testosterone changes that were the mechanism of the original claim did not replicate reliably. This was a significant failure, and it is important to name it honestly because the hormonal magic version of the story is not well supported by the evidence that followed. But here is what did survive. The observer's reading of posture as a status signal is real. When you see someone in an expansive, open posture, shoulders back, space taken up, not folded inward, you register it as high status. When you see someone in a contractive posture, folded, minimized, shoulders curved forward, taking up as little space as possible, you register it as lower status. This reading happens quickly, and it happens even when you are not consciously processing it. The decoding is real. What is not well supported is the idea that the posture itself magically changes your hormones and thereby changes your outcomes through a biological backdoor. What this means practically is not complicated. The body speaks and people read it. Not because posture puts chemicals in your blood, but because posture is continuous visible information about how a person relates to the space they occupy. Someone who chronically shrinks, who folds their arms across their chest, the way you might protect something fragile, who nods too quickly and laughs a beat too early and leans in just slightly too far, every one of those micro signals is part of a continuous stream that others are reading, not deliberately, but the way you read weather. A feeling accumulates, and trying too hard, the specific state we have been examining all along tends to produce the contractive pattern. The anxiety of needing the outcome makes you smaller. It makes you watchful in a way that shows. You are monitoring for signals of disapproval, which means your attention is partly on yourself, which means your body knows it is being evaluated and responds with the guarding posture that high-stakes moments tend to produce. You curl slightly inward. You take up a little less room. You are managing, and the management is visible. This is worth sitting with for a moment because it is a strange loop. The very fact of caring too much about how you are perceived produces the physical posture that communicates low status to the people whose perception you are caring about. The wanting produces the very signal that makes the wanting more urgent. The body, in trying to manage the impression, announces that the impression is being managed. Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop just slightly. There is something a little strange and a little tender about all of this. We are all walking around transmitting information we cannot see about things we are too close to ourselves to observe from the outside. That is not a failure, that is just being human. Let us continue. There is one more piece before we reach the root, and it is one of the most quietly useful findings in the whole landscape of social psychology. It is called the pratfall effect, and it was documented in 1966 by Elliot Aronson and his colleagues Lee Willerman and Joanne Floyd. The setup was simple. Participants listened to recordings of someone who was either highly competent or average incompetence, taking what sounded like a quiz. Then, at the end of the recording, the person either knocked over a cup of coffee, spilling it on themselves, an obvious, ordinary blunder, or the recording ended without incident. After listening, participants rated how much they liked the person. What Aronson found was not what you would predict from a simple logic of impressions. The highly competent person became more likable after the blunder. The average person became less likable after the same blunder. Same accident, opposite effect. The variable was not the mistake, it was the existing status of the person making it. The interpretation that is held up is this: for a highly competent person, a small human mistake is humanizing. It closes the distance. It signals that the person is not performing their competence anxiously, not maintaining it through careful management, but simply has it, and within that having there is room for occasional ordinariness. The blunder makes them accessible without threatening their underlying credibility. For the average person, the same blunder reads differently. It is one more piece of evidence for a shaky estimate that was already uncertain. Now think about what the trying too hard person is doing in this frame. They are, in most cases, attempting to demonstrate competence. They want you to see their value. They are monitoring themselves carefully, presenting themselves without blunders, catching every uncertain note before it escapes, managing the impression with precision. And ironically, it is exactly this anxious carefulness that erodes the thing they are trying to protect. Because the secure person, the person who has the competence internally and does not need you to confirm it, is the person who can afford the pratfall. They can drop the coffee cup, laugh honestly, and move on because their worth is not located in this moment's performance. It is already elsewhere. The trying too hard person cannot afford the pratfall, and the inability to afford it The visible management of every impression is what signals that the competence is provisional, contingent, in need of protection. Secure imperfection is more attractive than anxious flawlessness. Not because imperfection is inherently valuable, but because the willingness to be imperfect is evidence of something underneath, a self that does not need the performance to hold, because the self is not located in the performance. And now we have arrived at the capstone. There is a concept from negotiation theory that most people think belongs only in boardrooms and labor disputes. It is called BATNA, and it stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Roger Fisher and William Ury introduced it in their foundational work, Getting to Yes. And the idea is straightforward. In any negotiation, the party with the better walkaway option holds the power. Think about what that means specifically. If you are negotiating the price of something and your only option is to buy from this one seller, your need is total. You have no walkaway. You will accept almost anything because the alternative, getting nothing, is worse than any bad deal. The seller knows this, even if only intuitively, and the price reflects it. But if you have 3 other sellers who can meet your needs, you can walk. And the ability to walk changes everything, not because you perform willingness to walk, although you might, but because the internal state of actually having somewhere else to go produces a different kind of negotiator. You are calmer. You ask more directly. You do not scramble to close. You are not managing the seller's impression of you because the seller's approval is not load-bearing for your outcome. You can afford to let this particular deal go, which is precisely the posture that tends to get you the better deal. Fisher and Ury wrote about this in the context of business negotiations, but the social brain does not distinguish between the conference room and the first date or the office where your manager decides your raise. The same structural law is operating. The party with the better walkaway, the fuller life, the more options, the less dependence on this specific outcome, carries a different energy into every interaction. And that energy is not manufactured. It cannot be. It is an accurate report of an actual internal condition. This is the unexpected connection this whole story has been building toward. BATNA is not a negotiation tactic. It is a description of an emotional state, and the emotional state of having no BATNA, of being the person for whom this outcome, this person's approval, this job, this relationship, this validation is everything, the only viable path, is the emotional state that produces every single one of the behaviors we have been cataloging all night. The over-apologizing comes from having no BATNA. If you have no alternative, you cannot afford to lose this. If you cannot afford to lose this, every small friction is a threat, and you manage the threat with preemptive concession. The sorry before there is anything to be sorry for. The over-explaining comes from having no BATNA. If your standing in this conversation is everything, you cannot afford the risk of being misunderstood. You explain in advance of the objection because the objection, if it lands, is existential. You have nowhere else to go. The constant availability comes from having no BATNA. If your schedule is empty enough that you are always ready, always present, always waiting to respond within minutes, you are advertising an accurate truth. There is nothing else in your life currently competing for your attention, and the person receiving that information discounts it, the way Cialdini's cookies in the always full jar are taken for granted, not because they are bad cookies, but because available things feel ordinary. The reassurance seeking, the compliment inflation, the filling of silences, the conversational over-pursuit, all of it, every single behavior points to the same underlying condition. The worth has been staked on this particular outcome, this particular person's approval, and that staking empties the BATNA. There is nowhere else to go. And people can feel that, not always consciously, but they feel the weight of being someone's only option. And most people, when they feel that weight, set it down and step away. Take a slow breath. Notice where your chest is. Let it soften just a little. We are reaching the root now, and the root has a name. Jennifer Crocker is a psychologist who spent years at the University of Michigan studying what she called contingencies of self-worth. The idea is this: everyone has a self-esteem that rises and falls, and the question that determines much of your psychological life is what your self-esteem is contingent upon. What, specifically, are the outcomes or judgments whose arrival or absence moves your sense of worth? For some people, worth is staked primarily on academic achievement. For others, on physical appearance or moral virtue, or the approval of specific others. For the people in this story tonight, the contingency is external approval, the judgment of particular people in their lives, partners, managers, colleagues, friends, parents. In 2001, Crocker and Carol Wolf published a paper in Psychological Review that documented what happens when worth is staked on external approval. The findings were not gentle. People whose self-esteem is contingent on others' approval experience more stress, more relationship conflict, more anxiety, and worse outcomes across a range of life domains. And the mechanism is not complicated. When your worth depends on this outcome, the outcome becomes existential. And existential stakes produce the behaviors we have been naming: the monitoring, the managing, the over-apologizing, the endless, effortful pursuit, which in turn produce the very rejection that was feared, which lowers the self-esteem further, which raises the stakes of the next interaction, which produces the behaviors more intensely. This is the full doom spiral viewed from its root. It does not begin with a behavior. It begins inside, in the invisible, mostly unconscious accounting of where the worth is located. And because the behaviors are downstream of that accounting, changing only the behaviors without changing the accounting is unstable. You can decide to apologize less, but if your worth is still entirely staked on this person's approval, the anxiety will find another expression. You can decide not to overtext, but if you are checking your phone every 8 minutes, the need is still visible, and it will leak through some other seam. Self-determination theory, the framework built over decades by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, is clear that relatedness, belonging, connection, being seen and valued by others is a genuine human need. You are not broken for wanting it. You are not pathological for caring whether people like you. The desire is real and it is not going anywhere, and it does not need to. The problem is not the desire, the problem is the staking. The problem is when one person's approval, or one outcome, or one role becomes the sole load-bearing structure of your worth, so that if it shifts, everything shifts with it. That fragility, not the desire itself, but the total staking of everything on a single conditional, is what produces the behaviors. And the behaviors are what leak. Deci and Ryan distinguished between worth that is contingent on performance and approval, and worth that is more internal, more unconditional, not earned by outcomes, but simply present. And the research on this distinction is consistent. The more your worth is internally located, the more stably you act, the less you need approval, and paradoxically, the more approval tends to arrive. This is the paradox in its simplest form, and it is not a riddle or a self-help aphorism. It is a consequence of the mechanisms we have been tracing all night. When your worth is not staked on this outcome, you do not try too hard. When you do not try too hard, you do not emit the visible effort for approval that reads as low value. When you do not emit that signal, the social brain of the person across from you does not decode you as having no BATNA. When they do not decode you that way, they do not discount you. When they do not discount you, respect arrives, not as a reward, not as something you manage to extract, but as the natural read of a person whose self-concept is not on the line. This is why the conventional advice is so useless. When someone says be confident, what they are pointing at is real, but what they are saying is circular. They are describing the outcome. They are not describing the lever. The lever is not confidence as a performance. The lever is the location of worth. Move it inward, off the contingency of this single approval, and the confidence they are pointing at is not performed. It simply exists as a consequence of no longer needing the outcome. And this is why faking detachment never works for long. We touched on this earlier, and it deserves its full weight here at the end. The person who has read a little about these ideas and decides to perform coolness is attempting to counterfeit the signal without having the underlying condition that makes the signal real. They delay their texts on purpose, not because their life is genuinely full, but because they have heard that immediate responses read as needy. They practice nonchalance in conversations. They hold themselves back from expressing the enthusiasm they feel. And for a short time, this might shift the read slightly. The other person may respond to the changed behavior before they have had enough data to understand what is underneath it. But the counterfeit does not hold because the underlying need is still there, generating anxiety, and anxiety leaks. It leaks in micro-expressions. The almost imperceptible tightening when something uncertain happens. It leaks in timing. The staged delays that become visible as staged because they are too consistent, too deliberate. It leaks in the overcorrection itself. The person who is authentically uninterested does not manage their level of interest. Only the person who is anxiously faking uninterest has to manage it. And that management is itself a signal. Hatfield and Cacioppo and Rapson documented emotional contagion in 1993, the way anxiety is physically transmitted, caught by the nervous systems of the people nearby without anyone deciding to catch it. The person sitting across from the skillful performer of detachment is not reading their words or consciously analyzing their response times. They are feeling something, a texture, a low-grade unease that they may attribute to something else entirely, to the restaurant being too loud, to their own tiredness, to nothing they can name. But the something is there, and it accumulates over time, and eventually they find themselves less drawn to this person without being able to say exactly why. Authentic detachment, the detachment that comes from having real alternatives and genuinely distributed worth, does not produce that unease. It produces the opposite, a stillness, a warmth that is not desperate, an ease that is not performed. The person who does not need your approval is, paradoxically, the person whose company tends to feel most comfortable because they are not asking you to manage their anxiety as the price of their presence. And here is the thing that took the whole night to arrive at, the thing that is worth saying slowly in the quietest part of this long unfolding. You cannot get there by trying to get there. The moment you are working toward detachment, strategically pursuing outcome independence, deliberately cultivating the signal that you do not need the outcome, you are still in the trying too hard stance. The effort is now aimed at a new target, calm, secure presence, but it is still effort aimed at impression, and that effort still reads as effort, and the reading still does the damage. There is only one path, and it is not a tactic. It is an actual reorganization of where the worth lives, not a performance of that reorganization, not a decision to act as if the worth were elsewhere. An actual, slow, often difficult movement of the self-esteem, of the contingency of this particular person's approval, this particular outcome's arrival. This might mean practically building more into a life, more relationships, more pursuits, more domains in which you are capable and seen, so that no single outcome carries the total weight. Having other options, in the BATNA sense, genuinely and not strategically. Not to manipulate someone into valuing you more, but because a life that is genuinely fuller is a life in which you are genuinely less desperate, and desperation, as we have traced across the whole evening, is the signal that does the damage. It might mean examining slowly and honestly what the self-esteem is actually staked on, in the way that Crocker's framework invites, not to shame the staking, but to see it, because you cannot move something you cannot see. And most people have never once stopped to ask, whose approval am I actually treating as load-bearing? What outcome, if it did not arrive, would I experience as a verdict on my worth rather than simply as a disappointment? The disappointment is fine. The disappointment is human. Wanting things and not getting them is the texture of a life. But when not getting this thing means something about who you are, when it shifts the self-estimate, that is the contingency. That is the staking. And the staking is what produces the behavior. And the behavior is what signals the vulnerability. And the signal is what lowers the respect. And the lowered respect raises the stakes of the next interaction. And the whole loop turns again. The loop can be interrupted not by a behavioral trick at its circumference, but at its center, at the staking. And the strangest, most counterintuitive thing, the thing that this whole night has been a long, slow approach toward, is this. The moment you genuinely stop needing their respect, the behaviors that cost you their respect stop being emitted. Not because you have decided to stop emitting them, but because they were never chosen. They were always downstream of a need. Remove the need, and the behaviors simply have nothing left to express. The over-apologizing stops because there is nothing to preemptively concede. The over-explaining stops because there is no criticism that needs preempting. The constant availability dissolves because life, genuinely full, does not leave you always waiting. The posture opens because you are not guarding anything fragile. The silence is comfortable because you do not need to fill it. The blunder, when it comes, is just a spilled cup of coffee, something to laugh at and move past. And when all of that stops, something else happens. The people around you stop decoding you as low value, not because you have performed high value, but because the signals of low value are no longer in the stream. What remains is just a person, present and unhurried, who seems not to need anything from this moment that this moment is not already providing. That is the most expensive signal in the room. And it is the only one you cannot fake. It can only be had by actually having it. Robert Ziont showed us that repeated exposure increases liking, right up until it doesn't, until the baseline has shifted and more contact digs the hole deeper, which is the doom spiral's first move. Amos Zahavi showed us that credible signals are expensive, which is why the ability to walk away is the most believable thing you can communicate. Jack Bream showed us that pressure produces resistance, which is why the harder you push for approval, the faster it recedes. Hatfield and Cacioppo and Rapson showed us that anxiety travels through rooms without permission, which is why neediness feels bad to be near before anyone can name why. Howard Giles showed us that the one who accommodates more signals lower status, which is why every extra justification is a small concession of ground. Elliot Aronson and his colleagues showed us that secure imperfection beats anxious flawlessness, which is why the person who can afford to drop the coffee cup is more trusted than the one who can't. Fisher and Urey showed us that the better walkaway option holds the power, which is why having a genuinely full life is not a strategy, but a structural advantage. And Jennifer Crocker showed us that when worth is staked on approval, everything that follows is already compromised, and that the movement of worth off that single contingency is not a luxury or an afterthought, but the actual change that changes everything else. These are not separate ideas. They are one idea viewed from many angles. The idea is this: visible need signals the absence of the thing you need, and the only way to stop signaling the absence is to stop being absent of it, not to perform its presence, to actually, gradually, imperfectly have it. And having it, a life full enough that no one outcome is everything, a self-esteem grounded enough that no one person's judgment is a verdict, a presence calm enough that the room around you settles rather than tenses. That is not the end of wanting things. It is not the end of caring about people or hoping outcomes go a certain way or feeling the ordinary ache when something you wanted does not come. That ache is not the problem. The ache is just being alive. The problem is only the staking. The problem is only when the ache becomes load-bearing for who you are. Lay that down as much and as slowly as you can. Not all at once. These things do not move all at once, but a little, tonight, in the quiet that is here right now. Let the breath come easily. Let the night be wide enough to hold all of it. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to perform a new version of yourself, cooler, less available, strategically withheld. You do not need a list of rules about when to reply and how long to wait and what to say to signal that you are not trying. The whole exhausting architecture of tactics rests on a misunderstanding that the problem is behavioral when the problem is internal. Solve it internally and the behaviors solve themselves. There is nothing to manage. There is nowhere to perform. There is only the steady, unremarkable, deeply sufficient fact of being here, in your own life, with your own worth, which does not require anyone's confirmation tonight. It was always already there. You were only looking for it in the wrong place. Take a slow breath. Let the room around you be dark and still. Let everything that was tight begin, at whatever pace it chooses, to loosen. We have walked a long way together tonight. We met Willard Waller and his quiet law, the one that says, whoever cares less holds the power. We sat with the cookie jar and understood that availability, when it is total, reads as ordinary. We followed Amos Zahavi to the birds of paradise and their impractical tales and discovered that the most expensive signal is the most believable one, which is why walking away is the thing that invites you to stay. We watched Jack Bream's reactants push back against every pressure, felt the autonomy defend itself against every pursuit. We stood in rooms where anxiety traveled without invitation and understood why neediness feels bad to be near, even when no one can explain it. We traced the over-apologizer and the over-explainer and the posture that guards itself and the coffee cup that revealed who was really at ease. We crossed from the boardroom to the conversation and back and found Batner waiting in both places, the same structural truth wearing different clothes. And we arrived, finally, at the root, at Jennifer Crocker's contingencies, at the staking that drives everything, at the slow and genuine and irreplaceable work of moving the worth inward until it rests on something that cannot be taken by a single person's judgment or a single outcome's absence. That is the whole of what it was. Not a set of rules, a single understanding. And understanding it truly, all the way down, is the beginning of having it. Let the night keep you now. Let the breath come and go without you having to manage it. You are not being evaluated here. You are not being watched or measured or judged. There is only the dark and the quiet and the soft unspooling of everything you have been carrying that can, for now, be set down. Thank you for spending this night here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end, where the slow things live. One last sleepy beep before the dark. Good night.